All right, so a few days ago, I was having a chat with one of my friends, and she was feeling a little bit down in the dumps. She was feeling as if she was falling behind in life, and she wasn't living a life that she was loving, particularly. And so we kind of spent an hour talking about this and sort of going through a sort of step-by-step method on how to, I want to say unfuck, but that's not the right. We spent like an hour literally going through a step-by-step method on how to unscrew up your life. And at the end of the conversation, she found it very valuable. I got a message from her the following day saying that, it was really valuable since that conversation. She felt like she had her life a little bit more together. And so I want to talk through some of those strategies here because I get a lot of messages and emails from people who watch my stuff and who are struggling in a certain area of their life. Now, I'm not a therapist. I don't pretend to be a therapist. My shtick is not to dive into people's childhood, past, and trauma and all that kind of stuff. Great, do all that stuff with a therapist. I think of myself more as, a coach these days. Coach is a strong word, but like a therapist really focuses on the past and tries to figure out why you are the way that you are. But what a coach does is that they're like, all right, you are the way that you are. Let's now look at what we can do right now to help set you up for a brighter future. And so here's some of the stuff that we went through. And so the first question that I asked this friend, let's call her Jane. The first question that I asked Jane is, what would a life that you love actually look like? And she was a bit like, well, I don't know, like, what does that mean? I was like, okay, cool, that's fine. Let's kind of go more specific. What would an ideal day look like for you? Just one day. Let's say it's a weekday. Let's say, you've got work. What would an ideal day look like for you? And so we basically just opened up a Google Calendar window and sketched out what her ideal day would look like. And so it looked something like this. She was like, okay, well, ideally I'd like to wake up at 5 a.m. because I've read Robin Sharma's The 5 a.m. Club, and I've really been trying to be a morning person for a very long time, and I just can't seem to do it. I can't seem to be a morning person. And I was like, okay, well, I've tried to be a morning person as well. And I also realized I'm not a morning person. So why don't we just let go of that? Like, what if you simply decided that it's okay to not wake up at 5 a.m. or 6 or 7? Like, if you weren't concerned about what other people thought of you or the advice that a life guru was going to give you, what time would you like to wake up? And she was like, I'd probably wake up around 8. I was like, great, let's start waking up at 8 a.m. Great, now what do you do for the first hour of your day? And she was like, okay, well, for the first hour of my day, I want to do my morning routine, brush my teeth, and then I want to take my dog for a walk. I was like, okay, great. So how long is that going to be? She was like, maybe an hour, maybe 90 minutes. I was like, cool. Should we just say 2 hours? 8 to 10 a.m. You are taking your dog for a walk. Dog plus morning. How would that feel? And she was like, yeah, that would feel really good. I was like, okay, cool. What comes next? And she works from home. So she was like, okay, cool. Then from like 10 till 1, I'd probably be doing some work. I was like, okay, cool. Then there's a lunch block. So, 1 to, 2:30, 1 to 2 p.m., 1 to 2:30, which is another kind of walk the dog type situation. And then it was more work until, 6 p.m. And then it was another, have dinner and feed and walk the dog. Man, I realized when talking to Jane that having a dog is a total nightmare. I'm sure it's fun. But, having to walk the dog 3 times in the day. And then, in the evening, she wants to work on, personal projects because she wants to start a YouTube channel and stuff. Personal projects. And so that is what an ideal day in Jane's life would look like. I asked her how it felt to just have that written down. And she said that she's never had so much clarity on her life before. Because just seeing this written down made her realize that, this was actually achievable. And so then I asked Jane, what are you currently doing that's different from this? What is stopping you from living this as your ideal day pretty much every workday? She said, well, the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning is I scroll. And at nighttime, I struggle to get to bed because I'm scrolling. And I was like, okay, great, you're scrolling. What sort of apps are you scrolling on? She was like, YouTube and Instagram. And I was like, okay, cool. Have you tried downloading an app called Opal? And she was like, I've heard you talk about it, but I was like, okay, let's download Opal right now. Opal is an app that blocks distracting apps on your phone. And so there and then, she downloaded the app Opal. And she set it up so that from 9 p.m. at night to 10 a.m. the following morning, all offending social media apps were blocked. And she just did that in those 30 seconds, literally while I was having the conversation with her. I often have these sorts of conversations, and one thing I'm very bullish on is people just taking action there and then. If Jane had said to me, okay, when I get home after this conversation, I will download Opal, I guarantee it would not have happened. I'm always like, why don't we just do it right now? If it takes less than 2 minutes, you may as well do it right now. This is, another variant of the 2-minute rule. Anything that takes less than 2 minutes, just do it right now, because otherwise you're going to forget and life's going to get in the way and all this sort of stuff. So by virtue of just downloading a single tool, which is in fact free, we have already made Jane's life better by, preventing the scroll happening in the morning and preventing the scroll happening in the evening. And then she was like, yeah, but what if I decide to, I don't know, uninstall the app and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, you can always get around any system that you create for your life. But the whole point is the idea of nudges. We are nudging our behavior towards things that we actually want. And importantly, I wasn't the one telling Jane that she shouldn't be scrolling at night. She was the one saying that, like, yeah, I really wish I didn't just mindlessly scroll in the morning and in the evening. We're just nudging ourselves. If you've got a video game addiction, just simply unplugging your PlayStation and putting it in a cupboard is gonna be a nudge that will encourage you to spend less time on the PlayStation. Of course, you could just take it back out of the cupboard again and you could just set it up. But the fact that you have to do that, the fact that it's an extra amount of faff to set up the PlayStation, means that your brain is unlikely to go there in a moment where you feel like, oh, I haven't got any energy. And it's like, in those moments, we tend to default to the easy thing rather than doing the hard thing of uninstalling Opal and trying to get around its app blocking systems and stuff. And, a few days later, she messaged me being like, yeah, I haven't scrolled at all. It's like, great. By just installing a single app, which is free, you've just eliminated this scourge from your life and you've freed up a lot of your own time. Now, an important part of feeling as if you're thriving in life is feeling the sense that you're continuously learning and that you're constantly making progress, which is where the sponsor of this video comes in, and that is Skillshare. If you've been living under a rock and you haven't yet heard, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry pros across film, illustration, design, freelance, productivity, and so much more. One of my favorites is actually by my friend Nathaniel Drew, and he's got an awesome class called How to Speak Confidently on Camera, which is something I've personally struggled with in the past, back when I first got started with YouTube videos. It's super helpful to hear from a fellow creator like Nathaniel, who shares vulnerable and authentic lessons into how he built his own confidence while sharing some tangible steps that anyone can implement. Now, I've also personally been teaching on Skillshare since 2019, and I've got over 10 classes on Skillshare myself. I've got 3 classes that are specifically about productivity and a few more about using Notion, learning Final Cut Pro, starting a YouTube channel. So if you haven't seen those, you might like to check them out. Skillshare can also help you level up in your career with loads of classes around marketing, social media, UI and UX, being a freelancer, and some side hustle ideas as well. So if you're interested in checking out any of these classes or anything that Skillshare has to offer, then check out the link in the video description, and the first 500 people to use that link will get a free 1-month trial to Skillshare where you can try it out to your heart's content. So thank you so much, Skillshare, for sponsoring this video. So this was the first thing that we did. We sort of created this bit of a, this sense of a routine, and I asked her how would it feel if every day was sort of like this, and she was like, that would feel great. And then I was like, okay, cool. Next stage, let's define what does your ideal week look like. I've talked about this in videos in the past. It's unreasonably effective, where you basically just decide Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You kind of repeat this ideal day exercise, but for your ideal week. So in the case of Jane, she's sort of like waking up and walking the dog, sort of, let's call this a dog, from 8 to 10 a.m. pretty much every day. Monday to Friday was sort of 10 to 1 is sort of work. There's another sort of dog thing in the evening every single day. And doing the ideal week exercise helped Jane realize that actually, you know what, on Wednesdays in the evening, I would like to do something with friends. Great. On Saturday afternoon, I'd like to do something with family. On Sunday morning, after I've walked the dog, I'd like to do something for myself. And I've been really wanting to try yoga classes. Okay, cool, you want to try yoga classes? When do you want to go to your yoga classes? She was like, after work on Tuesday and Thursday, yoga would be really cool. It's like, great, fantastic, yoga's going to be really cool. And we just sort of sketched out what Jane's ideal week would look like. And I sort of asked, I was sort of giving her pointers at each stage, being like, okay, well, what about the gym? Do you want to do any weight training? She was like, yeah, I want to do some weight training. It's like, when do you want to do that? Oh, I guess I could do that Saturday morning. Any other times? Yeah, maybe even Wednesday morning. That could be like weight training after I've walked the dog. And we just sort of sketched out, what does Jane's ideal life actually look like? Because when we're feeling a bit like down in the dumps and feeling like life isn't going anywhere and stuff, again, I'm not a therapist, so take this with a pinch of salt. But one of the things that can really help is just having a compelling vision of the future. Having a compelling vision of the future to drive towards that helps us feel like life is actually worth living and there are actually useful things to be done. Now, having a compelling vision of the future is really hard if you feel like you're stuck. You're like, well, I've got my job and I've got my debts and I've got these bills and I've got to take care of this freaking dog, all of this stuff. It can be very hard to think 10 years ahead, 5 years, 3 years. It can be very hard to think even 1 year ahead. But that's why I like the daily and the weekly exercise, because we can always imagine next week. What would my dream week next week look like? And we're not saying things like, oh, well, in my dream world, I'd quit my job and stuff, because that's probably not possible right now. We're just thinking, within the bounds of what you can feasibly do in your life, what would your ideal week look like? And turns out you can define that, well, I'd like to do this, 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 and that. And so when we crafted Jane's ideal week, immediately, while she was doing the exercise, Jane really perked up. She was like, yeah, I could do this, and I could do this, and I could do this. And I really want to do that and that, but there's not enough time for that because I've tried to put it in this Google Calendar, and I've tried to define the bounds of my ideal week. And afterwards, we defined the ideal week, and I said to Jane, how would you feel if most weeks of your life you were able to actually follow this ideal week? And she was like, honestly, if I could actually follow this ideal week, I'd feel a lot happier than I currently am. And that was like, great, fantastic. What we've just done there is we have defined where we want to get to. This is the ideal week. This is our ideal week that's possible to get to within a couple of weeks, not the ideal week where you quit your job and your life circumstances drastically change. And looking at Jane's calendar and life, sort of A is your current state. And so at this point, all we need to do is figure out, okay, well, what's the path to get from A to B? And we're going to talk about that, but before we do, I want to cite something from a really good book called Designing Your Life by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. In the first chapter, they have a really good concept. Start where you are. What the hell does that mean? Basically, it would be very easy for Jane to think that unless I'm at my ideal week destination, that is how I become happy. But actually, that is something called the arrival fallacy, which is a psychological thing that happens where there is this belief that we have that when we arrive at a particular destination, that is magically going to be where we're happy or where good things suddenly start to happen. And broadly, it's a fallacy because it's not true. Because if you are unhappy in your current circumstances, chances are you're also going to be unhappy in your ideal circumstances. Obviously, we can remove stresses and we can remove stuff that's causing pain, and that obviously increases people's happiness. But really what we want to do is we firstly want to accept where you currently are and try and approach it in a very kind of non-judgmental kind of way. Not like, oh, I'm about to turn age X and I feel like I'm falling behind and all this sort of stuff. It's like, wherever you are is where you are. What your life currently is what your life currently is. Like, that is just the state of the world. Those are just the facts. And the extra story we add to those facts is what causes the misery. This is not original. This is from Stoicism and pretty much every other school of philosophy, that it's the stories we tell ourselves about the facts that lead to our misery, not the facts themselves. So maybe Jane's current calendar looks like, a shit show, and her ideal week is like way nicer, but that's okay. The facts are the facts. What Jane's calendar currently is and how Jane is spending her time is the state of the world, is the state of affairs. And so accepting that and recognizing, yeah, this is where I am, and that is okay. That doesn't mean that she's not going to have the drive to improve or change her circumstances, but it does mean that she can do that without feeling this kind of burden of guilt and shame at every step of the journey. Like guilt and shame, these burdens, it's sort of like you're starting at point A, you're trying to get to point B, and you're wearing this very, very, very heavy backpack, and you're lugging all this extra weight around. Every single step you take on this journey is being weighed down with the guilt and shame of being mean to yourself, telling yourself that you suck, telling yourself that you're a loser, telling yourself that you're falling behind all your friends and that you're, all of this stuff. But a lot of people who are not clinically depressed, a lot of us walk around with some amount of rocks in this backpack. Rocks that weigh us down, that we didn't do the thing well enough, we didn't travel far enough, we're not making enough money, we're not doing enough, whatever the thing is. The point that Bill Burnett and Dave Evans make in the book is, firstly, accept where your starting point is. Recognize that, yes, we're trying to get to a particular destination, but also, as we're getting there, the goal is to enjoy the journey along the way. Oh, by the way, if you're enjoying this video so far, you might like to check out my completely free 20 lessons I learned in my 20 email course. This is 5 days worth of emails. You can click the link in the video description, you enter your email address, and then I'll send you an email every day for 5 days. And each email will have 4 different life lessons that have been taken from my experiences in my life over the last 10 years. So if you're interested in that, check it out. 5 days of emails, you can unsubscribe anytime. It's completely free, never gonna sell your data, all of that stuff, but that's linked down below. All right, I'm gonna pause on this one for a bit because I actually have to go somewhere, but I'll be right back. All right, so it's actually a few days later. I've just come back from the gym, so I'm a little bit grimy, but I really wanted to finish off this video because I feel like we've got a bit of a journey here with Jane. So where do we go from here? How do we then change our life from A, where we are right now, to B, where we would ideally like to be? Now, whenever I have these sorts of conversations, there is a little action step mantra that I like to say, which is 1 small, 1 big. 1 small, 1 big. And this is in terms of action steps. And so the question I'll often ask to people, and I stole this idea from Tony Robbins because I think it's a good idea, is what is 1 small and 1 big action step that you could take right now? Or what is 1 small and 1 big action step that you could take this week to help you go 1 step along that path? Because we've got this path, right? This path from A to B. And the goal is to simply make changes to our life one step at a time. Even that can feel overwhelming, and so we need a place to start, which is why I generally say one small and one big. Now, in the case of Jane, as we've already talked about, this one small step was simply downloading an app to block distractions. And that was the one small step Jane took to essentially block the fact that she was scrolling in the morning and scrolling in the evening, and now she no longer scrolls in the morning and evening because she has added friction to the process. And I think part of the reason to start out with a small thing is because small actions create momentum. If you try and change your life with big steps at a time, it can often, especially for some people that works, like I like changing my life with like big picture changes. But let's say this is sort of your baseline where you feel like, yeah, life's kind of reasonably good, right? Let's call this the baseline. And then you've got above the baseline, which is amazing. I freaking love my life. Life is fantastic. But then you have below the baseline, which is overwhelmed, miserable, etc. I'm not saying Jane was down here, but she was probably sort of somewhere below baseline. Now, generally, when it comes to life advice, the things that take you from below baseline to baseline, these are actually different from the things that take you from baseline to thriving. So this is X, and this is Y. And this category of advice is often confused with this category of advice, and we really need to understand what area we are with the advice. So generally what I recommend is that if you're below baseline, it is often easier to take very small steps. If you feel like you're below baseline where your life is not even reasonably good, we want to start with small steps. We don't want to overwhelm you with trying to do too much stuff. If you're looking at this sort of advice, the stuff you get from baseline to amazing, if I know someone is at baseline and they want to get to amazing, I wouldn't be asking them, hey, what's your dream ideal week next week? I'd be asking them way bigger picture questions like, where do you want your life to go? What would you like written on your gravestone? What would you want your obituary to say? What would you like people to say at your funeral? What are some big dreams that you might accomplish in the next 10 years? And that really encourages people to think very big. This is thinking huge. At any of these stages, it's still fairly small steps that you have to take, but generally when someone's below baseline, trying to get them to think big, at least in my experience when I've tried to run this procedure with people, trying to get someone below baseline to think really big about where their life is going and to take big action tends to just make them feel overwhelmed and even more stressed, which is why I'm emphasizing this idea of figure out what is the smallest step that you could possibly take, because small steps generate momentum. And if someone feels like they're below baseline, chances are your confidence is quite low. There's a concept that I talk about in my book, Feel Good Productivity. There was a psychologist called Albert Bandura who coined this idea of self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is basically a fancy way of saying confidence, or self-confidence, or self-esteem. And if you feel like you're below baseline where your life is not reasonably good, you probably have fairly low levels of self-confidence, fairly low levels of self-efficacy, fairly low levels of this sense of autonomy, a sense of agency, a sense of I have control over my life. Because these are the sorts of things that take you to baseline and above. If you're in that position, the momentum you get from making tiny changes and experiencing these tiny wins generates a large amount of motivation. So momentum leads to motivation, not the other way around. It's not that motivation leads to momentum. It's like you do something small, you feel a win, and then that makes you more motivated to take another step. And then you get this virtuous cycle of motivation that continues, and over time you can start taking bigger and bigger and bigger steps. And the reason I'm emphasizing this point is because I think if you're here, it is the wrong idea to take advice from people who are saying, hey, suddenly start waking up at 4 a.m. That's a pretty big change. I've really struggled with it. Or, hey, suddenly start doing this big thing. We want to start small, generate momentum. That creates motivation. That creates a virtuous cycle that allows us to make these changes in our life. So that's why we're starting small, simply by downloading the app. When you download the app and set it up, you feel a little bit of a boost of dopamine. You're like, ooh, I succeeded. Maybe I do have self-worth. Maybe I am worth something, all that kind of stuff. And that is very good. So we got Jane to download this app. Now, once we've done that and we've experienced a little bit of this sense of momentum, I then like to sort of turn it around and ask, okay, what is one big action point that you could take? And by big, what I mean by that is essentially, what is a keystone action that you could take, or a keystone habit? James Clear talks about these in Atomic Habits, a very good book. A keystone habit is essentially the one habit that if you do that thing, then a bunch of other things take care of themselves. It's like the first domino. If that domino goes down, this is a terrible diagram, but then lots of other dominoes will fall. So for example, a keystone habit might be that as soon as you get home from work, you change into your workout clothes. That's a good keystone habit, because now that you've changed into your workout clothes, you are more likely to then go to the gym. If you've gone to the gym, you're more likely to then eat healthier. If you eat healthier, you're more likely to have more energy, you're more likely to sleep on time. And so a lot of good things happen by just identifying this keystone habit of, hey, I'm just going to put on my workout clothing when I get home from work. In Jane's case, we talked about how one of the keystone habits could potentially be forcing herself to wake up slightly earlier. So instead of waking up at 8:30 or whenever she felt like it, instead trying to wake up at, let's say, 7 a.m. Because if you can force yourself to wake up at 7 a.m., that becomes kind of a keystone habit. Because if you try and wake up at 7 a.m., but you slept at like 2 a.m. because you've been scrolling or you've been watching YouTube videos or whatever, you'll feel pretty grim. And if you force yourself to wake up at 7 a.m. every day, you'll eventually realize that you don't like the feeling of grimness. And so you'll automatically start sort of going to bed earlier and going to bed on time. Now you're going to bed on time. Cool. If you force yourself to wake up at 7 a.m. and now you're going to bed on time, you then have more energy in the rest of the day to do sensible things. If your work, let's say, starts at 9 or 10, it means if you wake up at 7, you actually have 2 or 3 hours to yourself in the morning where you can do self-care, where you can work on personal projects, and you can feel as if, rather than just this vicious cycle of I go to my day job, I get home, I eat, I go to my day job, I get home, I eat, which is sort of like a vicious cycle we can all find ourselves into from time to time. By creating that extra space for yourself, you can actually start taking care of yourself. You can start thinking of yourself as someone who is worth taking care of. And that extra confidence, the fact that you're taking care of yourself, maybe you're going to the gym, maybe you're eating a little bit healthier, maybe you're doing your personal projects, that will then bleed into every other area of your life and will have this sort of keystone domino effect of making other good things happen. The other thing we identified in Jane's case is that she doesn't eat particularly well because there's not enough time to cook, and then she orders takeaway, and then the takeaway sucks. And so the action point that we did in the course of the 1 hour conversation I had with her is that we just started a weekly delivery of those sort of healthy packaged meals that just get delivered to your house once a week, so that Jane's diet was put on autopilot. This is something I swear by. I now have these like ready meal healthy thingies, the good macros, like 600 calories, 50 grams of protein per meal, and it ends up costing a lot less than the takeaway habit would have done otherwise. I feel more energized, I'm eating healthier, and the healthy eating then again becomes a keystone habit that bleeds into other areas of my life. Because if I've eaten healthily, then I feel better about myself. If I've eaten healthily, I get more energy. If I've eaten healthily, I'll feel, you know what, I might as well go to the gym. If I eat healthily, I'm less likely to, over dinner, want to indulge myself in loads of fries or like a massive dessert because I've eaten healthily. It's sort of like this halo habit that creates a halo around my day that helps boost my own self-confidence and helps nudge me towards healthier behaviors in the future as well. So this was the conversation I had with Jane. She found it super helpful. She managed to make that big change and that small change to her life. And the next thing I'm going to do with Jane, once she feels like she's a bit closer to baseline, is I'm going to run her through a bunch of these, my favorite journaling prompts around how to figure out what to do with your life. And I actually have a completely free 3-part playlist linked right over there, which is all about how to figure out where your life is going in the long term, how to turn that into medium-term goals, and how to turn that into action steps. So if you've gotten to this point in the video, you might like to check out that series, and you might like to try out some of the exercises there. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. I hope you got some value out of this video, and I'll see you hopefully in the next one. Bye-bye.